to ask your average guest to name one scene in any attraction, there's a good chance they're going to say the stretching room. It's one of the most iconic scenes ever put into a Disney attraction, and for good reason. It's unique and there's nothing else like it. The humorous and macabre portraits are probably the most recognizable thing in the entire attraction. They've been referenced and parodied hundreds of times over. It's hard to pick one as just being the most iconic or memorable. So for the next few episodes, we'll be talking about them all. Starting with this gentleman, Alexander Nitrokoff. Who is he and what is his story? As usual, lean back in your doom buggy as we venture forth to find out together. The idea for the stretching room dates to the early 60s, when development on the attraction really began to take shape. At first it was just a cool illusion and effect, but once the facade was built, it served a more practical purpose. Right next to it were the tracks for the Disneyland Railroad. They didn't have the time, space, or resources to reroute the whole thing, so instead, they had guests sent down a level to get to the loading zone to board their doom buggies. The stretching room was a way to hide that you're going down. They'll be too distracted by the portraits to notice. The designer of the portraits was, of course, Mark Davis. There's an interesting story on how he came to develop it. Gil Gracie and Rolly Crump had been the ones to develop the idea for the stretching room, and Crump was working on some ideas for the actual portraits. Davis caught wind of it and basically told him, "This isn't good. I'm gonna make my own, with blackjack and hookers." Crump didn't take offense. He thought he'd do a better job anyway. There are a few known sketches of his concepts, but it seems like he had most of them figured out pretty quickly. Doing a couple passes on them and leaving it at that, which certainly speaks to his strong character design sensibilities. One of the 4 stretching portraits would be of a gentleman with a sash over one shoulder, holding the lapel of his jacket. As the portrait stretches, it reveals he's wearing striped underpants, and as it stretches even further, he's standing on a keg of dynamite, with a short fuse being lit by a candle. A funny image with a macabre payoff. Davis later did a concept for what the rest of the stretching room might look like, and this portrait was put in pretty much as is. This seemed to be the one he was dead set on getting into the attraction, which it did. When developing the attraction script, Exitensio had the idea to elaborate on some of the people in the portraits. After explaining that they were the mansion's guests, the ghost host would say that this man was Alexander Nitrokoff, an anarchist who came to us with a bang one night. The anarchist label seems to be kind of a misnomer, given he looks so stately, but that didn't really matter as this dialogue ended up on the cutting room floor. From Davis's concept art, different artists would adapt them into a more painterly style to match the tone of the attraction, and they'd be touched up as needed over the years. The artists behind the adaptations are largely unknown, but the general style is usually credited to Clem Hall. Hall was a great painter in his own right, with Davis calling him the greatest scene painter I've ever met. The character would star in his own story from the SLG comics, titled A Dynamite Party. This guy's named Steven, and he was invited to Gracie Manor for a house party. He had a pair of glasses, which the Hatbox Ghost knocked off, leaving him blind. He wanders through the house, ending up where he thinks is the party. He sets a candle he brought down with him on the ground, climbs on the barrel, and you can figure out the rest. Why isn't he wearing any pants? Because his wife Edith told him to put some on, and he didn't do it just out of spite. Women, am I right? He showed up again in the Fridays of Fancy comic, this time with his original name. He's one of a few ghosts that Sydney has to help so she can stay at the mansion. They decide to change up the outfit he's wearing, giving him a new pair of boxers. However, his ideas of scary are a lot different than hers. When Sydney starts getting frustrated over the lack of progress, he's the first one to speak up and say how good of a person she is. He's a lot more pleasant in this than the other comic. I know, low bar. The name Alexander Nitrokoff was lost to time for a while. It didn't resurface until more of Exitensio's script was made public. In recent years, it's basically been adopted into Mansion canon. I think the moment a name gets slapped on a Funko Pop, it's all over. Since I just showed it, I should probably mention that there's a page on the My Disney Experience app that elaborates on some of the ghosts' backstories. The most we have about Alex was that he was a blast at parties, and he could light up any room he was in. There's even a little poem about him, kind of like the one on the Poetess Crypt. Beloved Nitrokoff could light up a room, especially when his pranks would end with a boom. Does this mean anything? Was the whole barrel thing just a prank gone wrong? As far as I'm concerned, it's anyone's guess. I swear, Haunted Mansion lore ends up in the most random places sometimes. Alex would serve as the inspiration for a character at Phantom Manor. The 2019 refurbishment introduced us to 4 of Melanie's suitors. Each befell a terrible fate thanks to her father's meddling. Ignatius Knight, who also goes by the name Iggy, was a dynamite manufacturer who vied for Melanie's hand. Take a wild guess how he dies. The new portraits were painted by Greg Pro, and in Mansion tradition, each of the suitors were modeled after Imagineers. Iggy was actually modeled after Greg himself. But back to Alex. Anything else of note? He was a playable character in the Disney Crossy Roads mobile game, called The Orator for some reason. He's an NPC in the Disney Emoji Blitz game, and the portrait was recreated in Muppets Haunted Mansion, with him fittingly portrayed by Crazy Harry. Alexander Nitrokoff is a bit of an outlier as far as mansions go. One of the most striking images in the entire ride, but doesn't get a ton of attention outside of it. I do think that could change if the Fright of Fancy comic is any indicator. Now that more people know there's a name to go with his face, maybe there'll be a push to do more with him. Who knows? However, there's still a lot of ground to cover, because we have 3 more portraits to go through. So please sit back in your doom buggy and we will proceed in the next episode. Thanks for watching.